right. So if you put a retail executive on the floor for a week, what would be the one habit that I'd want to break them of? I think the thing I'd say the most is assuming they know what it's like to be on the front line or on the sales floor all the time, right? Even after a week, you really don't get a full understanding of what it's like to be in front of customers every single day in all sorts of different situations. So, yeah, the biggest habit to break is don't make the assumptions, ask more questions, be more curious about what's really happening out there versus anything that you can assume in an office. There's a million things you can probably put into this one. I think most executives think if they say it, it'll get done. And that's just not the case, right? I mean, if it were one, store operations, store communication would be easy. And I chuckle every time I've ever heard. And if I had a nickel for every time I heard, well, just tell the stores to do this. If it were only so easy. There's a lot that goes into, communicating to stores and helping the stores be supported in the way that they need to be able to execute. That it's never that simple, and there's always something going on. You're always competing with some other priority that from thousands of miles away, you don't know what's going on, right? In any given store, they've got people who've called out sick, they've got new team members, they had just a bunch of people go back to school, so they just had to hire a bunch of new people. I mean, all of those things are happening on any given day in any given store. So the idea that it's as easy as let's just do this and magically X hundreds of numbers of stores are going to execute, it just doesn't happen. So it's always taken in, especially when you're supporting folks in the corporate offices, it's in, letting people know, well, hold on a second, we're going to have to take a step back. There's more to it than this. We're going to need to go through these steps. Let's make sure we're communicating. Oh, by the way, we've got this person, this person, and this person, these different roles that need to be communicated to as well. So let's make sure we're building in the time. Let's make sure we're building in the effort to ensure that everyone's getting the information and communication they need along the way. So it almost always, I guess the second half of that is it always takes longer than people expect it will. And that's not a lack of urgency. That's just a reality of how long some things, especially important things, take. And if it's not well planned out, you're probably going to feel like it's rushing or you're going to skip steps. And that's why you start seeing execution breakdown as well. I think in some respects, most metrics that people look at can fall into that category, right? There's so much more to running the business than any one given metric. And look, I'll give two examples there. They'll be wildly unpopular. People will think I am absolutely crazy in saying them. But I do think that people obsess over comp or year over year numbers way too much. And part of it is, look, this year is different from last year. So the numbers are going to be different. And we all want to grow the business. So I completely understand why people look at it, industry analysts look at it. Is the business growing? How are they doing year over year? But there's also a lot of factors that go into that, both at the store level and at the company level, that really can influence it in a real way, not in an excuse way. There are real factors that can influence, comparative year over year numbers. And those all need to be factored in. The whole story needs to be told rather than looking at the metric on its own, because we spend a lot of time trying to explain a number versus really diagnosing what is happening in the business through observations and through deeper dive analysis, and then solving for those problems versus the amount of time we actually spend trying to come up with something that explains a number that we don't really fully understand. The second one, and again another unpopular one, and I'll explain it. So this one's around customer satisfaction or net promoter score. I think people spend a lot of time talking about a number that represents what they believe the customer is saying. And I don't think that's always accurate, right? Because on paper, that's just a number. And customer satisfaction or their willingness to talk positively about your business to others is a feeling. It's an emotion. And a lot of times those numbers, unless they're really well understood and defined within the business, they're just numbers, and that's not going to help you move your score. I mean, what a quote number for one business might not be good for another business, and we try to compare ourselves to a number. And look, I am a giant fan of measuring customer experience, right? And I distinguish customer experience versus just satisfaction and Net Promoter Score, because to get it right, you have to ask the questions. You have to observe, right? If you want to know how your customers are experiencing your store, just stand back and watch. And then if you want to understand more about it, go ask them. Hey, tell me how you felt about the visit today, right? Or your purchases today, or your time in the store today. I mean, that's how you really get to know what customers are feeling. And, again, lots of great companies out there. But unless you're getting the context behind it and you're getting a lot of data, it just doesn't have as much weight as people are putting into it. So you take a company like True Rating, who asks a single question at checkout. One, they get a very high return, so they get lots of answers to that. And then they ask multiple single questions to different customers. Now you can start to form a better picture of what's really happening in your store. I still don't think it completely replaces the go observe and ask questions in a particular location if you want to know. But trying to understand your customer with one number, one numeric score, I think that's just too much to ask of any number. And those are very popular metrics. People have them on every scorecard out there. So in terms of what could you look at? I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question? Let me ask it that way.
Yeah, the unglamorous numbers that nobody wants to look at.
Yeah, the unglamorous numbers that no one wants to look at. Those are the ones that are hard to get, right? And you can call them, so comp, CSAT, Net Promoter Scores. Those are all very much lag indicators. They tell you what's already happened. You're looking at a report from something that days, weeks, months old. The unglamorous ones are the ones that are happening through observation and are a little bit harder to get at, right? So, there's a lot of retailers out there that look at, they ultimately want to measure the behaviors of their team members. So, we want to make sure we're capturing a customer's phone number or email at checkout. Yeah, there'll be a report that says that, but again, kind of a number that is, it may or may not be accurate. If you want to understand if you're really getting at it, go watch for about 20 minutes how people at the front end ask. Do they ask for people's emails or phone numbers? How do they ask about people's emails or phone numbers? If they're excited and they can really engage somebody about why they're asking for that information and the value to the customer, I guarantee you their results are better. But unless you're looking at that, the unglamorous ones are the ones that are hard to get to, and they're the more leading indicators because they're behavior driven and behavior based. And some of the metrics that are just harder to understand or don't have these huge fluctuations. Conversion's another good example. You're probably not going to move the needle quickly on that unless you really understand what the core problem is around it. Like, what's not happening, that if we know we've got foot traffic into the store and it's just not converting, again, unless you stand back and observe, the number itself isn't going to tell you anything other than maybe I should go look and understand this more. So that's the tough part about metrics, is none of them are silver bullets. None of them tell you everything, yet we put a lot of weight and emphasis into it, and a lot of energy gets placed into metrics that aren't necessarily telling you the whole story unless you ask the questions behind it. Look, you start trusting the numbers a little bit more when you're the one that's not having to answer the question of why. Why is your number this way, right? When you can take that step back and you can kind of breathe a little, and then you can see what's going on, you realize there's way more to it than what there was before, right? And I think that goes with, as you move through it. Look, I've worked at every level of retail, right? So I've been an hourly associate, part-time job. How you see something is very different from when you get to a store manager, right? So as a store manager, you see a little bit wider, you understand a little bit more. But it's not until you get to the district level. Now you see even more. You see all the stores in the district and not just one. In the region, you see all the stores across a big geographic area. And then when you get to the corporate office, you see all of them across all of these different areas. And if you're curious and you really want to understand it, you start asking really different questions. And that's the only way you can really get out. If you're, down at the store level, it's very hard sometimes to understand because you just don't know what you don't know. And if someone's always asking you about a number or a metric, you're just trying to get an answer because you know that there's other stuff for you to be working on. So, I think that's the tricky part is, again, for DMs and regionals and even corporate leaders to help everyone in those other levels see beyond just their role, because that's truly what they can contribute to it. And when you do that, all of those other initiatives, all of the executions start to make more sense. I mean, it's all about that vantage point that you have, and when you can see more and understand more, you engage in a deeper level. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons that can happen. I've probably even had some of them myself, right, where the numbers look good. And, it's one of those things where, the saying goes, hey, when you have good numbers, that solves all problems. And that's, everyone also says that a little tongue in cheek because they know that's not really the right, that's not accurate in any way, shape, or form. That you can have a really strong performing store and you can and have like things falling apart around the seams. You can have bad numbers but a great team doing all the things right, and it's just a matter of timing to pull it all together. So, again, I think it all comes down to you've always got to look beyond the numbers themselves and look deeper into the surface, like what's really going on, how does the team really feel. And great district managers who run great districts, they're the ones who engage at every level in the store. They're not just in a store talking to a store manager. They're talking to the assistant managers, the supervisors, the front line, the hourly folks, depending on, how it's all structured. But they're talking to everybody, and they're not just talking to them to be polite. They're really trying to understand and learn about their experiences, their, how they feel and work, like enjoying working with the company, what gets in their way of doing things. And, I always found it interesting. And again, sometimes, you have to realize that when you get into different roles, your title gets in the way, right? So, if you're in a store and you're from the corporate office and you're asking questions, everybody's a little bit guarded in their answers. So you got to kind of break down some of that stuff. But, a lot of times, I'd ask a question like, hey, is there anything we can do for you? Is there anything we can help fix? No, 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 everything's fine. And then you start saying, well, what about this? Oh, yeah, that would be a problem. It'd be great if so you have to kind of come with, you got to kind of know what's already probably not 100% and plant the seed with them to get them talking. And then suddenly you'll find out, you'll learn all sorts of stuff. But if you ask a surface level question, hey, how's everything going? What's not working well for you? You're probably going to get a polite answer like, okay, yes, nothing's wrong. Just I'm going to go back to my work now. But if you engage and you really understand, hey, look, I know this is probably something that's kind of challenging for you. What can we do differently? How would you solve this problem? You suddenly get very, very different answers and you get a lot more engagement. So, I think going beyond the numbers, back to the question, is you got to ask and you've got to engage. Um, and I think as we get into new technology and we start having new tools, especially around, a lot of the AI tools, when it can tell you a more complete story, you have more places to go investigate. And I think that will be important for district managers, not to overuse the numbers and forget about the conversations, but utilize the tools and the information that's being fed to you to go have more in-depth conversations, saying, hey, I'm seeing X. Tell me why you think that might be. That's a very different question than, well, what do you think's going on here? So that's where I really see being able to use some of this new information that's available to people in really engaging ways.
Speaking of investigating and experimenting, what's the most expensive thing retailers do that adds minimal to no value in the store.
All right, so my quick kind of snarky answer, yet not wrong, is they cut payroll and labor, right? So you're like, well, but that's not an expensive thing. Oh, it's very expensive, and most people probably don't understand how expensive it is taking that little bit of resource off the floor, because we don't always get the right information from customers. But um, I think you can look at the history of retail over the last couple of decades. And as we've cut expenses out of the stores, it has become harder and harder to really earn all those retail dollars back. Um, that's a that's a great question. Look, again, store managers know everything that's going on in their store on any given day, right? Like they know the mood of their team. They know all the snarky things that are getting said about the company, quote, behind the company's back, right? And a lot of times they're the ones saying it. And often you can't blame them. So they most good store managers for sure have a really good pulse on their business. Why it doesn't get up the chain, there's probably two really hard answers to that, right? And they're hard because you don't want to necessarily face that reality. Is one, no one asks. They don't ask the right questions. So, like the example we were just talking about, hey, what can we fix in your store? Oh, nothing. Everything's good. Well, what about? Don't you have a leaky roof? Oh yeah, it's always been like that. How about don't are the registers working right all the time? No, they don't. They cut off, or they don't do what we're supposed to, or I have to engage with the self-serve checkout way too much. You've got to ask those questions. You've got to ask them the right way, and then you've got to have a culture of listening at every level. So that's probably the biggest reason why most store managers aren't going to bring it up, because it simply doesn't go anywhere, or they're afraid of the ramifications. If they say, hey, this always happens. This is a real problem. Why don't we fix it as a company? They get labeled as a troublemaker versus someone who's really trying to help the company. And look, there are right ways and there are wrong ways to do it. And I'm sure there are plenty of managers out there that, complain about things. But I think that's also where you've got to ask some different questions and have some different conversations to try and pull out, is it really just a complaint, or is there really something there that I need to uncover in a different way? And look, the other thing I think that prevents it from happening is there's something always going on. There's something new. There's new initiatives. We talked about that, in one of the other segments where, everything that comes to the store feels like a new task, or that it's getting layered on. They simply just don't have the time to have conversations about, things that could be done different, or think about it. They're just trying to survive in a lot of cases to get through the day and the week and the month, and let it all repeat for the next day, week, and month. Yeah, so until people start to slow things down, ask the right questions, and then listen for the intention of doing something with it, even if it's to coach back and say, hey, is that really a problem, or is that just something you've limited yourself to? That's all part of it. But until you have that culture and kind of that environment to be curious and listen, it's tough to actually hear what the store managers know, and they know a lot. I, I think I would say stop and pause for a second and say, did we ask everybody at every level what their thought is, right? And when I say everybody at every level, I don't mean go talk to thousands of associates or hundreds of store managers, but get some representation in there, and not just like a district manager representing store managers. No, get some store managers that represent store managers. Um, but I think the other thing I tell, the C-suite is make sure you're always really honest about the environment you are creating in your organization. Are you really getting the voice? Can you really hear what people are saying? Because if not, the initiative that you're rolling out, that you're signing off on, that you're going to spend millions, if not tens of millions of dollars on, is probably not going to get you the result that you're hoping for. and probably certainly not as fast as you're hoping for, right? So was the right time invested in the size of the initiative? There are some initiatives that you don't need to spend weeks or months getting ready for. Then there are other initiatives that you do need to spend weeks and months getting ready for. And sometimes we just want to go so fast because fast is fast. It just gets lost. So don't confuse urgency and speed. Make sure that you've got everybody concentrating on the right things so they have the right sense of urgency to get this done. But urgency doesn't always mean fast. So don't always make it about speed. Sometimes it's about the quality, and it takes a little bit more time to invest in that. If you haven't asked yourself those questions at the C level before you sign off, I think you're going to miss opportunities to get it really right.